So let's say I want to create this person, this Reza person, and I want to code that. First thing, we can't just create the object magically. We can't just say, "Oh, there's a Reza and that's it," or "There's a this specific keyboard and that's it." We have to first create the blueprints that defines that object. So before we could create any of our objects, we need to create the blueprints, also known as the class. So to be able to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to right click on our package or on our source file. It should most likely be your package. Right click on it, new, and I'm going to click Java class. I'm going to give a name to that Java class. Again, the name is really important. Make sure it's a capital letter, and the rest you use the normal Pascal case. Pascal case, yes. So in this one, I want to create an object Reza, but to be able to create that object Reza, I first need to define what that object is. Reza, me, is a specific version of that object. It is not the definition of that object. I am a person, but so are you, right? I want to create me, but before we could create me, we have to say what all of us people, persons, have in common. What are our attributes? What are our actions? Right? So before we could do all of that, we need to create the blueprint. Actually, a good example of a blueprint. This is a great example. These are blueprints, and you could see some of them are blueprints for houses, such as this one. So before I could create my house, I want to define what it is so everyone's on board with the creation. And if you're a contractor or something, the moment you create a blueprint, that's the blueprint you start selling to everyone. The house is defined, everything seems to be in order, it checks out. The same thing goes for other stuff, such as, let's say, the SpaceX Falcon Heavy, right? Before we could create that object, we need to define it, the attributes, and the actions that it could do. You'll also find other stuff, such as whatever this mech suit is, or the boats, etc., right? Whatever this thing is. Anyway, right? So what we're doing is to create a blueprint that we're going to utilize to be able to create that object. So we're not writing Reza, we're writing the object that Reza is. And that object is going to be a person. And notice, like normal, when we create one of these classes, you'll get some initial boilerplate code which comes in. Now, let's go bring back our stuff here. Now, we have the name done. We need to define the attributes of a person. So the first thing before we go further is just remember that a class, this is what I like to tell my students, that a class is the same thing as a blueprint. It's the blueprint to create more of persons. So eventually I'm going to create you, that other person, etc. Now, after having the name done, which is a perfect name, person defines what it is, we need to give the attributes. We need to say what defines a person. And we talked about that. We said there is a string which defines the name, right? We said there is a height and a weight and a width and etc. So we just got to utilize the correct types for those. So for height, do we need to be integer, float, etc.? You make up the decision. So let's say float the height. Let's say float the weight. I don't know. What else? We got hair color. Now we don't have a type for hair color. We could eventually come back. We're going to create those objects that will define what a hair color is. right now, for now, we're just going to leave it as a string. We're going to come back to this later. So let's say hair color, string, I don't know, skin color, and it goes on. We could list a million attributes, right? Normally, you will figure out when you're creating a system or objects, you're going to create the attributes you require. No meaningless attributes and no meaningless attributes and no extra attributes. I don't know if that makes sense to you guys. But sometimes you create things because you'll think it's going to be utilized and then it's not, and then it's just hanging there. We don't need to define every attribute that exists, just enough for us to do what we need to do. And later on, we could come back here and add more attributes, such as, let's say, we got the name, hair color, skin color. What else do we have? Something easy that we're all, I don't know. Let's say, how much hair do you have? Like, I'm a pretty hairy guy. Got hairs everywhere. So, actually, that's not a good thing to do. I don't know. I'm trying to keep it simple, but at the same time, we're running out of stuff. We said weight, height. Eventually, we add, let's say, the eye color as an example. Anyway, so these become our attributes. Attributes are what defines our, oops, I can't type, defines our object. So if we look around at any object, those attributes are going to define them. Attributes also take different names, such as field variable. I'm going to say aliases. Field variables. This is probably the most common one you'll see. You might hear some people say this is the class variables, but field variables is more specific. Attributes, what else did they call it? Sorry, I'm having blanks. Field variables, attributes. Yeah, this is fine for now. If I remember them, I'll add them. If not, who cares? You'll notice that the aliases will come up sometimes. You just need to get yourself familiarized with it. I'm having a complete blank. I've been tired last couple weeks. So we're just going to move on for now. And then we said we need to say what type of actions it could do. Right? Now, actions are basically things that it could do. So it's anything that's a verb that's going to be an action. So what can a person do? Well, they could talk. So every action that we create, we're going to create a method that would be called the moment it needs to talk. The moment the class person, the object Reza needs to talk, that method would be called. So how would we create that method? Well, like every other method, we have to say the return type, in this case void, a good name that represents what it does, and this name needs to start with a verb, at least for now. So anything that's an action, we're going to start it with a verb, and in this case, it's talk. What is it going to say? Well, this we could pass as a parameter to the method. String message. And then we define the body of that talk. Let's say system.out. Let's say let's grab our name, right? That's our field variable there. Our name, and we're going to concatenate it with colon or with space says, and we're going to add that little message, right? You think this is nothing much, but this actually makes loads of difference. Another thing you'll notice is normally in front of our methods, so far we've put something called static. Let me see if I could grab this last one. So whenever we did anything, we added a couple things. A accessor. We're going to talk about this a bit later. And this word static, which we're going to talk about later. But for now, you'll notice that I'm not adding it anymore. And we're going to stop adding static for the time being until we learn why that word is there. So that's our first action. Notice that our actions are basically methods, or some people might say functions, right? So this could be the aliases. So a class methods, class functions. This is by the way, functions again, it's interchangeable in Java, but it's not the correct word. Sometimes people use it, but it's not the correct word. If you don't know what the difference between methods or functions was, go back to the previous videos. All right, let's go to the next action. So we have talk. What else could a person do? Well, let's say the person jumps. Now, if the person jumps, you got to tell them how high to jump. Sometimes maybe the method itself will determine how much to jump based on the height and the weight. If I'm 6 feet tall, I jump. If my weight is less than 200, I could jump 2 feet up. If my weight is over 200, I can only jump 1 feet up, right? You make your formulas, calculations, whatever. We could also pass it as a parameter saying, well, I want you to jump this high, right? And you make the code for that, whatever the code is in here, right? You could also have methods that return something to whoever initiated it. So we could have a method that gives back, let's say, what could we have for a person? Let's say, I want some money. This person is, I don't know, for our example here, this person owes me money, or it's my dad or something. I want some money from my daddy. So we're going to say the return type is going to be float because I want that cash back to the caller, that value back to the caller. And we're going to say, let's say, give allowance, right? Now, look over here. Again, if you notice, the first word is a verb. So always a verb that's going to start our methods. And we're going to keep going like that and say how much? Amount. I can't spell. Now, look at the way the name flows for the method. Give allowance amount. Right? This is the name of the method, what it's doing. It should be precise. If you need to make it 20 words, go with 20 words. When we need to call this, we need to just type in one letter, and you'll notice that the IntelliSense will pop up and autofill everything. There's no reason that your naming should be bad. If your method name does not represent what it does, you did something wrong. If you come to an interview with me and you give me like X or really useless names, well, even though you might be a genius, I will not hire you because, again, we're working with a team. We're working with hundreds of people. We want to make less reading, more understanding. So give allowance amount. And inside here, we could check how much money we have. Is it good, etc. And eventually return the amount we want to return. Let's say 5. Okay, there's no logic right now. We're just talking about objects. So now if we look, we have a person that has these attributes and that could do these things. And we could have more and more and more and more. Right? So this is the initial setup for creating our object. Now, let's go. I don't want to do these yet. What else can we create? Do I want to do more creations yet, or are we going to come back to it? Give me 1 second just to think about this. This is fine for now. So this is our attributes. This is our methods. Now we need to create this person. We're going to do that in the next video. I'll see you guys then.